War does not determine who is right, only who is left. The words of Bertrand Russell, which resonate deeply within today's episode of Nightmare Fuel. The horrors of war still echo loudly, even after it went all quiet on the Western Front. Previously on the channel, I covered the Oscar-winning 1930 adaptation of the Eric Remarque novel. Sadly, since then, the video has been age-restricted, which is a shame because the core message of All Quiet on the Western Front is one that everyone should hear. Thankfully, there's a brand new version that's just dropped on Netflix, and that's what I'm going to discuss today. There will be major spoilers ahead, as I'm going to be recapping key plot details. If you're familiar with the 1930 version, there are some similarities here. There is also a 1979 version, which I still haven't seen, so I won't be able to make any comparisons to that version, sadly. Feel free to comment if you would like to share any relations. The fundamental core of the 2022 version is that we follow Paul Baumer, a young German man who enrolls into the army during the First World War. We are presented with the German side of the war in a way where they are incredibly personable and it's easy to sympathise with them. This was groundbreaking in the original version, as it was made with a cast of mostly American actors in the German roles, in a way to make American audiences feel a sense of relatability, despite those generations of audiences, in parts, having an ingrained stigma against the Germans. It was a technique that blurred the perceived enemy into the perceived heroes who you rooted for. In the 2022 version, this has been replaced with a cast of mostly German actors, including Daniel Bruhl, who is Spanish-German. And I really like that decision here, as it feels more authentically German, especially when watching in the German language with subtitles. The English dubbed version does work really well in a similar way to the original film's impact, but for me, watching it in German yet making the characters extremely likeable was the key to unlocking the main theme of Western Front. Some moments here present such unbridled humanity, such as when the soldiers have cold hands while trying to drain a trench, and they're advised to put their hands down their pants for warmth. We also see Paul and Kat heading to a farm to steal a goose and return it to base, where the group cook it and act like they're living like kings. They are aware of the irony within the scenario, and just for a little while are able to laugh it off and connect with each other. I actually think this version did an even more stellar job with making the characters likeable compared to the 1930 version. Equally, when we see these soldiers screaming and panicking for their lives, we are able to feel for them due to us having an attachment to them. You feel their plight and torment being pressured onto them from all angles, and that is daunting to consider. So there's a bit of context on the overall setup of the film, and the prominent method Western Front uses to teach us that in every war, there is no true good side or bad side. Everyone is both a victim and an assailant. Now I'm going to discuss some of the more frightening sides to the film, story elements that reflect the unrestrained terrors of war. The film opens up with a powerful piece of imagery. All is silent and calm, peaceful. A small family of foxes nest together. Love within nature is apparent, but on the surface, there's anything but love to be found as a battle breaks out. Because of community guidelines, I'm not going to be able to show much of the grisly detail, but Western Front is certainly one of the more brutal war movies I've seen in a while. Living, breathing men become empty vessels in a split second, as we see a lot of grisly blood and gore throughout the film. Bayonets, knives, and shovels are used for more intimate, close kills, while explosives, flamethrowers, and even the tracks of a tank are used to take out others. Some of the sights in this film are truly unsettling, providing shocking imagery in an unrelentless fashion. In this category, there were two scenes that stood out to me the most. Firstly, a key Western Front scene, wherein Paul and a rival soldier clash in a bomb crater, with Paul coming out on top, stabbing the soldier. Still alive, Paul apologises for what he's done, scrambling to try and save the soldier, calling him his comrade before he dies. This version of the scene added a few extra elements that made it so much more tough to stomach. The soldier gargles on his blood, which not only sounds disgusting and horrifying, but it begins to drive Paul insane from the sound. So he shoves a handful of soil into the soldier's mouth to shut him up. It was just nasty to watch. The important climax to this scene comes after the soldier dies. Paul retrieves a wallet from his coat, finding a picture of his family inside, who you would assume are his wife and child. It's in this moment where you realise in war, everyone is a human being. They have love within their lives. They have aspirations, just like Paul. Yet far too many people, like this soldier, had those opportunities cut short because of the overarching clutches of warfare. However, sometimes in war, some people survive, yet they have no desire to. That is presented in the haunting haunting scene wherein an injured German soldier takes his own life by repeatedly stabbing himself in the neck with a fork, shouting it's all over for him now. A man so physically and psychologically decimated by the war that he'd sooner butcher himself and escape it all rather than live another day inside his head. The saddest part about Western Front to me is that the people who suffer in this film on screen were not the only ones to suffer. The casualties of the First World War were so extensive. This film gives you a kind of bottled image of the war, giving you such a tiny portion of what occurred over those 4 years, yet it's soul-crushing. You could never capture the scale of the war's damages in a single film, yet even showing the point of view of a small handful of soldiers, it's enough to give you a lump in your throat at several points. I think the strongest symbolic inclusion to demonstrate the true scale of the war comes from the uniform segment. Sack after sack of blood-stained uniforms are piled up and transported to a team of seamstresses. The uniforms are cleaned and repaired, and then redistributed to the next wave of soldiers. When Paul grabs his uniform, it still has a name tag on it from its previous user, which is ripped off, and an excuse is made that the previous owner of the uniform probably found it didn't fit him. Happens all the time. The new recruits are so keen here, having been riled up by a professor at their school, another key Western Front scene, yet the uniform distributors don't tell the new recruits that these uniforms have been lived and died in before. And who knows just how many times? How many times have these uniforms been repaired for the next lot? It echoes an important scene in the original version, wherein a pair of boots in good condition get moved between different soldiers. You follow the boots being on a man's feet, the man dies, and then they transfer to the next owner. It really does have the power of sinking deep into your skin, making you aware of the history and cycle of warfare. Even here, the name tag we see on the uniform belongs to a soldier named Heimlich, who is a soldier we see in the opening segment of the film. So despite becoming slightly attached to them for a short period, their story is cut short to the audience. Even the film cuts immediately to the title and silence, which to me signifies that may have been the instant the soldier was killed, having his life immediately cut to silence. Besides the uniforms, we get an additional symbolic image of a pile of metallic ID tags on a desk, each possessing a soldier's name and birth date. They are read aloud and accounted for before moving on to the next in the pile. Each of those tags represents a human being, a person who has fought and died in battle, each one with a story and a character and a history, now gone, lost in the flames and the blood. Our two main characters here both fall victim to the war themselves. Kat dies in a different manner to how he did in the 1930 version. Here, Kat and Paul return to the farm they stole the goose from, this time stealing some eggs. The little boy who lives on the farm tracks them and shoots Kat in the liver. He dies on his way back to base, yet Paul feels such disbelief as he was only just talking to Kat. It's the medic's reaction here that unsettled me the most though. He announces that Kat is dead so nonchalantly, and when Paul questions him, he says he knows what he's doing. The medic has witnessed so much death that it's desensitized him to a point where he's casual about it. That speaks volumes on just how much death was involved here. In terms of Paul's death, he comes face to face with an enemy soldier and they have a scrap. For a moment, it looks like Paul is going to be forgiven, that he's going to be shown mercy in the same way he wished he'd not acted against the soldier in the bomb crater. However, Paul is stabbed through the heart from behind, mere seconds before the armistice is called and the end of the war is announced. Mere seconds between living and dying. It's a heartbreaking moment. I do still think that Paul's death in the 1930 version is done in a more symbolically touching way, yet here it's the fact that Paul could have lived if he'd had a few more seconds of luck, and that hurts the most. Paul walks out of the bunker, ascending up the steps from the darkness into the white mists of the outside, as if he is entering heaven, before he dies from his fatal wound. The 2022 version of All Quiet on the Western Front is one of the most powerful war films I've seen, with gorgeous cinematography, and is incredibly well produced, yet is undoubtedly full of an all-too-real form of nightmare fuel. In the words of Mehmet Murat Ildan, no war has ever won in the history, because people died in every single war. Where there are deaths, there is no victory. In memory of those lost in the First World War, and all wars throughout the world, I'm going to continue this video with silence until it hits the 11 minutes and 11 seconds mark, signifying the end of World War I on November 11th, 1918. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to share your thoughts on any version of Western Front, Battlefront, or this new version in particular, then please feel free to in the comments below. I've been Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, and thank you for watching. Cheers.